Welcome back to another
Hey,
podcast. Hey, Laura, good to see you.
nice to see you, Max.
How's it
Thanks for having
going?
me. It's great.
I mean, we're kind of both, as I mentioned earlier, we're kind of running a little bit of the guinea pig session here. First time trying out this podcast studio, so hopefully people will enjoy it.
I'm liking it. I love the background. Everything looks great.
The
Yeah,
Macintosh Classic looks pretty good
it's
behind you. It's like
awesome. It's awesome. Yeah, I love the setup. You guys have a great setup here in San Francisco.
cool. Yeah, I mean, it's always nice to kind of see you around. I think first time in our kind of little podcast office studio here. I
Mm.
mean, bit of background on you. I think people can of course check you out on LinkedIn and everything, but I think there's a lot of personal story to you that's going to be exciting throughout the pod. I
Thanks.
think one of the things that's exciting to you, you were one of the like OGs at Google Cloud in the initial days,
Yeah,
thinking about sales and go to market there, which I think is super exciting, taking on the early cloud curve there and
yeah, yeah.
kind of how that has evolved over time. You were the global sales leader for Unity, which maybe a lot of people that are excited about gaming, like I was back in the days, definitely know and get excited about. And then recently, you were a CEO at a AI company in San Francisco as well, in
Yes,
the go-to-market tech space. So I think lots of stories to tell.
yes.
I think my first opener would be, how did you initially get into sales? Because I feel like there's always a whirlwind of a story to that,
Well, like most people, I did not study sales,
right?
although I know some colleges
They
now
offer it now.
offer that,
That's
which
right.
is so great. Um, but no, my funny story here is I worked for a resort after I got out of college because the job market was horrible. And so I ended up kind of diverting off of the typical go to work and make a living right out of college.
Mhm.
And I went to a company called Club Med, which many people may have vacationed at before. And I was working on the sports team down there.
Okay.
And while I was down there, a company had rented the resort out for their president's club. So
No,
I was
it's
quite
funny.
intrigued. I'm like 22 years old, right, in
Mhm.
Mexico, talking to people who are sharing that they are on vacation for free because they did a great job.
That's funny.
And I was like, "Oh, do tell more. What is this whole thing about?" So they were like, "Yeah, we're all in sales, and if we hit our quotas, we got to come on this trip." So I got to know
That's
several of
so
these
funny.
people, and at that point, again, I knew I wouldn't do, work for this resort forever. And they're like, when you go back, you should go into sales. You have the right personality for it. You'll have a lot of fun doing it. And I'm thinking, and then maybe I'll get a free vacation out of this. So that is honestly how I got into it. I
Mm,
came back. I had no idea of what to do. I had graduated from UC Santa Barbara. I was a communications major.
mm,
Kind of thought I'd go into journalism. So this
mhm.
is really fun. Um, but yeah, I came back and I got hooked up with a recruiting agency that was recruiting salespeople. And yeah, that's the rest is history. I kind of was like, I guess, all about the free trip to Mexico. And here I
Oh,
am.
so have you
Yeah.
ever done a President's Club in Mexico again, or was that the last time?
No, I have. Yeah.
Oh, you
I've
did? Okay.
gotten a lot of things. Yeah. It's
Okay,
been
nice.
actually like, again, I got it. Let's see, what would the year have been? Like 1995 was probably my first job. I was a SDR at SGI,
Okay.
which was a super cool company at the time. And then I went to a little startup, 60 people in San Francisco. So that's
Mhm,
why I love seeing these offices today.
mhm.
I was an SDR there and got promoted up to field sales and President's Club. And I got to drive a Porsche for a year. Again, when
Nice.
you're 28,
Yeah.
it's pretty amazing. And yeah, they would have all these spiffs. And this was back in the day. So it was a lot of fun. And I loved selling. Like I loved what I did. And I
Mhm.
felt really lucky that I had found that pretty young. So yeah,
Do
that's
you
how I
th
got into it.
do you think there was a certain level of, I mean, you mentioned competition, right? Of like, I think just seeing the kind of, I think like being in sports, there's a lot of competitive drive
Yeah.
that happens,
Yeah.
and like sales teams act very like similar. Where I
Yeah.
think even though they all kind of peers and they all work together, it's a competitive motion of who's going to become, who's going to be part of President's Club, and it's I
Yeah.
think like everybody's kind of encouraging each other to kind of do their best work. Was there any like part of you, like especially with like thinking about sports and how that connects to that, that also got you excited about sales being that competitive motion in it, or was what?
Yeah.
Or was it like the insight that you had about sales that you liked?
It's funny, Max, because I didn't play sports really growing up. I
Interesting.
was
Oh,
actually in theater.
okay.
Um, but similar, you're working on a team to put together a production. So
Right.
I had that feeling. I love being on teams. Um, I think I kind of surprised myself
Mm,
figuring out how competitive I was, and I am. Sometimes people will ask me like, "What's something we might not know about you?" And
mm,
I'm very competitive,
mm,
but it might not come out in my everyday what I do. But yeah,
mhm,
I love that, and I love having a goal.
mm.
and I love being measured by my ability to hit these goals. Like
Mhm.
I liked that a lot. So
Mhm.
it resonated well with me. Yeah, so I guess I found my inner athlete a little later on in
In
life.
sales, right,
Yeah,
right. And there's, I
exactly.
mean, there's a lot of things that you have to manage as well, right? From like blocking and tackling is a word that I learned as a
Yep.
German here, being in the US. That that's
Yep.
a word that's sports related and is definitely very powerful in sales too, of
Yeah.
like thinking about the concept. Maybe talk a bit about kind of how sales has evolved, right? I think like
Yeah.
President's Club, I think is still around. I think some companies call it differently these days.
Yeah.
Anything else that you've seen that maybe just has evolved with AI, maybe also like things that you've
Yeah.
observed over the life cycle of being in sales in different companies and different stages, different types of organizations.
Yeah.
What have you seen?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it relates to how we interact with customers. So back when I was at SGI and HP, it was you went and you sold a contract to a customer
Mm,
and then you kept in touch with them. But then 3 years later, when that contract was ready to be renewed, that's when you really engaged again.
mm,
That's completely shifted to this constant engagement. And as leaders, we have to figure out how to fine tune what that customer experience is. So, like that in and of itself, I think has driven different behaviors with salespeople.
mm,
Um, yes, I think people still do President's Club, although I haven't been part of
mm.
a company, in all honesty, that's done one
Really? Mm,
in ages.
interesting.
So I don't know. It
It's getting old
depends.
school. Is that
I think it depends on the company. I tend to land at companies that are very product and engineering first
yep,
focused. So
yep,
Google was like that, Unity was like that.
mm,
Um, I don't know if that has something to do with
no,
it.
no,
So yeah, I don't know. I love seeing those things happen.
mm,
It wouldn't drive me one way or another as much maybe as it would have in the past.
mhm.
But I still think it's fun, and I still think people like to earn things and be rewarded for good work. So
Yeah.
it just may come in other forms.
Yeah, and maybe the outcome of that event
Yeah,
is different, right? Maybe it's just not everybody flying to
yeah,
Hawaii now,
yeah.
and it's like a different part of like how you bring together everybody.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's a little more inclusive.
Yeah,
It's not just celebrating the salespeople. I think there's
that's a good point.
recognition that it's all hands on deck when it
Yep.
comes to winning these deals, especially with younger companies,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
I'm guessing you all at Minoa, everyone's involved as you
It
go
is, yeah.
and work with these customers. So
Right.
yeah,
Which I mean, like, there's a whole notion about like what it actually means without the theory of being customer centric, right? And I
yeah,
think it also means that the engineers have to be in customer support. It also means
absolutely.
that salespeople maybe think about what are additional products and use cases we have to discover to explore and to build, right? I think that kind of the team effort across like different life cycles of an
Yeah,
organization and how it kind of impacts product to engineering to go to market, I think has also changed, right? It's not these like separate rooms and people don't even talk to each other. The idea is to bring them closer together. And I think companies
exactly.
are still struggling with that partly, right? Especially if they've been product led and they move up
Yeah.
market and they now have a sales team. Like, how does that interfere with the initial idea of being a product organization,
Yep.
which I think you've been part of?
Yes. Lots of opinions on that too. Yeah. Yeah.
Anything you want to share there?
Well, I just think it's figuring out how to fine tune the models, if you will, when you're in more of a PLG or even like an online. I think there's PLG, and then I think there's products that just lend themselves to being sold online. Sometimes
Yep.
those two get mushed together a little
Mhm.
bit, but it's then the question we have to ask is like, when do you apply humans to get a better outcome?
Yep.
Because
Yep.
sometimes you shouldn't,
Mhm.
and sometimes you should. And now enter AI. Well, can I actually, before I go to the human,
Mhm.
can I leverage AI to help drive a better outcome?
Mhm.
When do I bring in the human being? And
Yep.
I I believe human beings will always have a big role in
Mhm.
this. I think those that communicate most effectively
Mhm.
will come out winners and can really help guide these customers on this journey,
Yep.
especially with AI. But yeah, that PLG to sales led
Mhm.
motions,
Yep.
it's something to think about. Like, how do you fine tune that? And I think it's
Mhm.
a fun challenge. So I
Yeah, I
like
mean,
that.
it feels like on that note, right? I think you mentioned kind of the seller has to be able to communicate well,
Yeah.
right, and have to. And I think that's kind of comes back to a bit of the. I mean, the word sales experience is a bit like old school as well. But I think like how do you build a sales slash customer experience, right? That actually is mapped to what the customer would like to see, right? And I think AI kind of enables you to do that because AI takes all of the different data points, context to help you better refine your story to that customer.
Yep.
Um, have you seen, I mean, we work with so many different sellers over the like basically years and years. Like, what's been the clear differences between the sellers that are well performing and the sellers that maybe were struggling and needed more coaching? Like where did you, like,
Yeah.
if you bring it down to like a few points, like
Yeah.
what was the difference?
What I have found is not one personality. It's not the outgoing person or the athlete or,
Not anymore.
I still no, I
Okay.
don't think so.
Okay.
I really believe it's people that can go in and understand what the problem is
Mm.
that needs to be solved.
Mhm.
So it's the listening skills, it's the understanding the problem on all levels. Like maybe it's at times somebody's personal problem,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
They need to do something in order to get promoted or, you know, those kinds of things. It might be the company's problem, but just like I believe what will always stay consistent is you've got to be able to solve the problem,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
And those that understand that and that can do it to such a level, multiple levels,
Mm.
personal problem, company problem, and then really map a value-based solution back to the problem, those are the people that are most successful.
Mhm.
And what those sellers come to the table with, I mean, it can be all kinds of different things.
Yep.
So I look for people that know how to ask really good questions,
Mm.
um, and listen
Mhm.
and are thoughtful. So, and people you want to generally spend time with, right? And you feel like your customer is going to be able to trust. And with all that's going on with AI right now, I think that's going to become even more important.
Mm.
Is that people are, if they are going to make big investments in technology,
Mm.
they are going to want to trust the people behind the investment they're making.
Right.
So I think it becomes even more important. That's my prediction.
I mean, it fits nicely into the trend that we're seeing with kind of just even marketing, right? Of like, how do you even get to customers, right? It's like the
Yeah.
centric of like bringing founders more to the forefront of organizations, and they are kind of the spokesperson to additional employees within a company. Also sets the stage for apparently like there's more trust that's being given to individuals than the brand, right?
Yeah.
And I think that
Yeah.
dynamic kind of flows through
Yeah.
the entire system of there's an initial spokesperson that will then kind of lead to a salesperson talking to a customer. And if you don't trust that salesperson, like you did with the spokesperson that's kind of articulating the value and
Yeah.
the vision of the company, there's a breakoff point, right? And people take a cut off there, and they
Yeah.
don't trust you as a brand, they don't trust your product, they don't trust the outcomes
So important.
of what
It's so
happens.
important. I'm and that's where I feel like it's helped me be successful. Like I spent a lot of time as a seller,
Mhm.
right, with my customers.
Yep.
Um, I still, regardless of role, I love being out with customers. I
Mm.
think that's where the magic happens.
Mhm.
It's where I get my energy.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's really important.
If that's one of your habits, like, is there any other habits that are very like Laura specific that you think also made you a good leader within all these different companies? I mean, being in customer meetings, I think it's like
Yeah,
something still that's people. I think they talk about it, but like how many meetings do they actually join? But I think if that's one of
yeah,
your habits of actually doing, I think that's awesome. Is there anything else that you kind of have tried to kind of embed into your system whenever you start a company that you just try to
yeah,
do that? Maybe it's unconventional for a sales leader because maybe from the outside it feels like it's not the most productive thing you could do, but it actually helps you and helps
yeah.
the team.
So I mean this really genuinely, like I'm genuinely curious.
Mm.
Um, I'll give you an example because I think it highlights it. When I joined Unity,
Yep.
which is a developer platform primarily, but not only used by game developers. So when
Mhm.
I joined, um, 90% of their business was tied to game developers.
Mm.
I'm not personally a gamer, so different than you.
Mm.
I appreciate creators. I had to figure out when I went out and saw customers, what is the value I'm going to add
Mm.
if I'm not a gamer and
Mm.
if I've never built a game.
Point.
And what I leaned into was my genuine curiosity of how does someone take a vision of a game and actually get it built?
Mm.
And trying to really understand and empathize and just embed myself in that world through asking good questions,
Mm.
genuine questions. And that's how I figured it out. Where I came to with that is kind of going back to the value discussion, actually.
Mm.
I'm not going to go step in and pretend that I can help a game developer develop a better game. That's not my role.
Mm.
But I can start to have discussions about how you can do it cost effectively and where are the gives and gets around using an engine like Unity versus, for example, using internally built tech.
Yep.
So that was a discussion that I became more familiar with and
Mhm.
felt sincerely that I could go and have that discussion. So
Mhm.
I think again, it goes back to that, like just really sitting down with people and understanding what it is they're going through regardless of the technology. So I've never felt, I'll take any new technology any day. I'll just come at it with a curiosity,
Mhm.
and it's, uh, it's done me right. So, yeah, I
That's
like it,
such
yeah.
a great story, and I think, I mean, empathizing with the other person on the other side, that you actually understand what they're kind of going through and what their probably mental questions are that they have of like, "Okay, I could do this myself, right? And within our
Yeah,
own company and with our own setup versus there's this new company now that could actually take away some work from me and
yeah,
would make me more efficient."
yep,
Super interesting. I think it kind of speaks a lot to kind of how you thought about the value discussion. Maybe speaking to that, I think it's an interesting angle. I could imagine that, especially with developers, right? And I think there are many other industries that are very similar. You have direct personas, call them champions, that you could work with that maybe are technical by nature, and they have to do some sort of an executive pitch at the end of the day to our friends who are CFOs and procurement
yeah, yeah,
leaders. And how did you kind of learn? What's the difference between selling to maybe a developer or like a leader in engineering versus equipping them to have a conversation with executives that maybe don't actually care about the engineering parts of the work that they do?
right. Well, and I'll take it back to, like, what problems are we trying to solve?
Mm,
And sometimes your customer needs to be educated. Somebody at one level, maybe a developer
mm,
who's really focused on building the game.
yep,
Let's take that, right? They want to build the best game. They want people to love playing the game.
mm,
The CFO at the gaming company is like, and also we have to make money on this game so we can go fund other great games,
right,
right? So I think enabling and hand holding that developer to go have that conversation with the CFO
mm,
as they go and ask for the funding to bring in the third party game engine
yep,
is something that you can do,
mhm,
right?
mm,
And the more you can arm them with data, the better.
mhm, mhm.
So, yeah,
Did
that's how
did
I
you
approach it.
did you have to build, like, even specific talk tracks for them? Because maybe, like, the person that's, like, an engineering leader has never had a conversation with a
Yeah,
CFO about, like, actually buying something, right? Like, do you think it's it's better to actually join the meeting and be part of that and just help them? Or do you think
yeah,
it's fully about equipping, giving them the talk track, the narrative, the story? Like, where have you seen kind of the break-off points, and what
yeah.
has worked well for you maybe in the
I
past?
think it depends on the customer. I
Yeah.
think in most cases, you want to arm whoever your champion is to go in and have the conversations.
Yep.
Um, Maybe there are times when you can kind of serve as backup. I'll give you another example that's
Yes.
not
Yep. Yep.
gaming,
Yep.
but when we were early days at Google Cloud and I
Mm.
was working with a customer that wanted to move to Google Apps.
Okay. Yep.
These were board level decisions. Everyone moved. It wasn't, we'll start with this little group and they'll move and then it was a full scale, big deal to move over to Google. And we had to be really smart about where we spent our time and the customer. We needed to engage with the customer in the right way. Um, we got through the end of a sales cycle. We were selling, our champion was the CIO,
Mhm.
and they were getting ready to announce that they were moving to Google. And because I'd been through this many times before, and you learn when you get your butt kicked a little bit, I knew that my competitor, Microsoft, was going to be right there trying to disrupt what we had done, what
Mm.
we had spent months doing. And in this case, I had dinner with the CIO and I sat down with him and I had prepared some messaging for him to give to his board. This is a
Mhm.
public company,
Yep.
to give to his board. And he said, Laura, why are you giving me this messaging? I'm like, because I believe what's going to happen is our competitor is going to come in and likely have a conversation with some of your board members
Mm.
to try to convince you not to do this.
Mm.
And he thought I was a little off my rocker, but I am paid to be paranoid, as we say in sales. And so we armed him. And it turned out later on, he didn't tell me this for a couple months, but it turned out that
You
that sheet, that
you used
paper
it.
that I put together came in very handy. Let's just say that.
That's so cool.
So, again, it can take place at all different levels.
Mm.
Um, it's never a bad idea to help arm
Mm.
your champion and your customer
Mm.
as to what is the value, right?
Mm.
And when they can reiterate it and you hear them reiterate it, that's when you know you're in a good spot.
I love that story. I
Yeah.
think it touches on so many things that we often try to talk about as well, right? Of like one area being this concept of like stakeholder specific messaging, where the message that the CIO needs to deliver to the board is very different than the engineering leader to the CIO, right? And I
Yeah.
think that narrative is going to differ. And of course, the root of it is going to be the same because we're still touching the same problem.
Yeah.
The problems are not going to shift, but how that then ties to an executive, like board level conversation is going to be different, right? And you want to prepare
Right.
each individual conversation the right way, thoughtfully. while also ensuring that I think what you're describing is also like you're a little bit of a step ahead, and yeah, the idea of being paranoid I think fits it very nicely, of thinking what is the things that can actually break the deal versus like what do we need to
Yep.
do to make the deal. And I think like actually figuring out like where do we position ourselves and what are the counter facts that we need to deliver in order
100%.
to help somebody.
What I will coach my leaders on to coach their teams on is answer the question,
Mm.
why are we going to lose this deal?
Mhm.
So one of my favorite reps, Greg Roundtree, if you're out there,
Shout out.
shout out, my friend. He came up with this idea. He said, Laura, whenever I look at my deal, I just say to myself, if in 6 months from now, I'm going into my forecast call and I'm saying that I've lost,
Mm.
what is the reason why? And great, it could be, and the thing was like, go wild. I mean, this example I gave you of like, oh, Microsoft's going to come in at the last minute and
Mhm.
infiltrate the board. And that, right. That sounds kind of crazy. Well,
That's-
guess what?
it will happen.
Right. It will happen. We've
Yeah.
all seen crazy now. So, really, and then you build plans to help mitigate that risk.
Mm.
Kind of falls in line with the 3 whys, why do anything? Why now? Why particular vendor?
Mhm.
But yeah, I think that's another thing. Like just sit and think about it, especially when you're doing these big enterprise deals,
Yeah.
right? You invest a lot of time and a lot of resource. You have got to qualify
Mm.
and you have to spend time thinking about how you're going to lose
Mm.
to a point of paranoia.
Yeah.
Because it helps you build in these really great plans. So,
Mhm.
and then ideally at the end, nothing bad happens and you get the deal and it felt kind of easy because you had all these backup plans. Great.
I feel like that's the beauty of like go to market in a way, right? Of like you have to have probably somewhat an extreme optimism at all times, but then
Yes.
sprinkle in some pessimism in order to like be optimistic. And
I call it pessimistically optimistic.
okay, you do actually.
Yes.
That's funny. Okay,
I
yeah,
don't want to like, especially with less experienced talent.
yep.
And they're so optimistic and I love it.
Mhm.
I love it. And so what I have to teach them is like, okay, don't lose that optimism, but
Yep.
now we're going to add a little bit of pessimism
Mhm.
in it
Mhm.
so that we are very, very thoughtful
Mhm.
about where we're spending our time and not just getting, uh, happy ears.
Such a good point. Maybe a little bit of a kind of a different direction, but I think there are a lot of people probably listening that work in go to market and they see kind of the market moving, right? I think we talked about this earlier actually when you came in, of like
Yeah.
there's AI and kind of course there's a big like hype and kind
Yeah.
of excitement about AI and what it can deliver to companies. And then you have companies of all sizes in many different forms that want to IPO and they have a plan and they kind of struggle to get there, and
Yeah.
maybe sales numbers are not there yet. If I'm maybe a frontline manager and I have a team of like 10 to 20 people and I need to continuously kind of communicate with my sales leader, like what we're going through, that it's more difficult, like what would you recommend these people to think about and consider when they speak to the former Laura of like what is happening in the market, where they struggle, like what should they take in order to better communicate, where are the issues, like how can they,
Yeah.
what are they thinking to solve it, like what's the way to communicate with sales, like CROs and top level like sales leadership right now in times of difficulty and AI and kind of just a lot of things happening left and right.
So let me make sure I understand the question, Max.
Sure.
So how would you coach a sales team to go approach their customer, the CRO,
And
or
internal.
internal?
Internal. Yeah, that's right. Because I mean, I could imagine there, like from like the conversation I have with like frontline managers, right? They
Yeah.
have a lot of things going on. Their teams are not hitting quota, and they're
Yeah.
pressured by their chief revenue officer or their respective sales leader
Yeah.
to get to the numbers. So, and I think there's always this internal conflict of they're probably doing their best work, but they're not getting there. And then you have to communicate to your CRO, like your forecast maybe isn't there where it should be, right? Like, and there's a lot of like internal just like tension that happens in a lot of these organizations right now, that I think somebody like you that has worked with so many teams
Yeah.
probably have some advice either for maybe like this chief revenue officer type leaders that actually maybe need to somehow form the team
Gotcha.
now
Okay.
versus the mid-level, like how what's
Yeah.
been your thinking there, what has worked well in the past?
So I think it comes back to communication.
Mm.
All of it always comes back to communication. I want to give you I'll tell you a couple stories.
Mhm.
Early days of Google Cloud, there were a lot of people not hitting their number.
Mm.
Everybody thinks because it was Google and Google was flying high. That was the advertising and the consumer side of the business where
Sure.
we were, it was hard.
Mm.
So we called it, the trough of disillusionment. And what was cool about it was we were all kind of struggling together. So we built this like super tight knit team, that these people that I would consider my friends and do anything for, years and years later. As a salesperson, it was the first time in my career that I didn't hit a target. And I was freaking out because, as we talked about earlier, I'm super competitive and I'm like, what's even happening right now? So I sat down, and I'll never forget. I took a walk with my manager, and I sat down with him and I said, "Are you going to fire me?" And he turned to me and he goes, "I'm not. No, we're all figuring this out together." I needed in that moment to know, it's really hard right now. No one feels safe. Can we just agree? Like, it's a really hard time. This is when your skills are going to be really important, right? Nothing is easy right now. I know that. I've felt it myself firsthand. Communicate with your leader. When you're having a hard time, communicate with your leader. Sit down. Come to the table prepared with, here are the things I'm doing. What am I missing? Help me out, right? People want to help their people, right? So I'd say that if you're an IC listening to this, like, communicate. When I was an IC too, I remember there was a woman that I work for, and I asked her for advice, and I said, "What does it drive you crazy when salespeople do?" And she goes, "It just drives me crazy, Laura, when they wait until the very end of the quarter and then they come and tell me they're having a problem."
Yep.
So if you're having a problem building pipe, if you're having a problem qualifying a deal, if you don't have enough resource, like whatever it is, communicate that to your leader. That would be my advice there. Now let's flip it over to the leadership side.
Yeah.
So I think the job of really great go-to-market leaders is to be constantly turning the knobs on what we can do to drive a better outcome. So I always picture myself in the cockpit of an airplane with all of these knobs, sometimes an overwhelming amount, and constantly trying to figure out, like, how do I do this better? Even when I'm doing well, how do I do it even better? How do I get more efficient? So I'd advise someone to first sit and just think about, what knobs do you have to turn and what can you do? The second thing I advise people to do is use data. I realize when you're a young company, a startup, you have a lack of data, but really what you're trying to do is find trends, right?
I understand.
I'll give you another example at Google. One of the trends that we found, where we were winning deals and we were losing a lot, and we were winning a few, but what we started to uncover, you had the startup companies that were going to use Google because that's what they'd all used in college. That was kind of like a no-brainer.
Right.
But we were selling to enterprise, to the big companies. What we actually found was kind of like this little silver bullet, was companies that were trying to attract talent and couldn't because they seemed like they were pretty old school. They were interested in moving to our platform because it helped them attract talent. And that wouldn't be something that's super obvious. So my other idea is, like, maybe don't assume things to be the way they've always been. Like, look for trends that might not be obvious in what you're doing.
It's not the typical demographics, and like, you check, it's not a check mark thing that you look for, right? That every company has.
The other thing I'd say too is, especially for some of the AI companies, like, don't assume the playbook you had at these other companies is going to work anymore. So I was listening to a podcast too, where they were talking about zero-based budgeting. It's like zero-based sales go-to-market plan, right? Like, what if you started from scratch? What would you do different? What else could you do? What should this look like? So just be careful of repeating things, because I think we're at a time in technology where everything is going to shift. Like, the ground is moving below us. Don't ignore that, and challenge yourself to just think about, like, what if I just started all over? What would I do? And then take some of those ideas and begin to implement them in what you've got.
There's so many. That's an incredible answer. I think that it kind of speaks nicely to just, like, I think the velocity and the time frame of, like, how decisions are being made has just dramatically reduced. Right. I think even of, like, I would just talk to a company this morning who mentioned that their customers, they were initially thinking that there's a procurement cycles that happen at the end of every year, and that's kind of what you attach yourself to. And even that is changing, right? That organizations are especially as companies get more strategic in procurement, they think about more flexible cycles to make decisions because they can't wait like 8 months to make a
Yeah.
decision if the competitor is already moving ahead, right? So I think everything is just changing to a shorter cycle, and I think that's kind of what salespeople also have to react to, right? Of like AI is going to make fundamental decisions to how you approach customers and
Yep.
kind of what are you using today that maybe was not even there like 2 months ago,
Yep.
and adapting yourself to that kind of learning curve
Yeah.
and just being mentally more flexible to run at actually what's
Yeah.
most important right now. I feel like that's just a mental thing that we all have to
Yeah.
get used to. But I
Yeah.
think you pointed out nicely of how that even back in the days, right, at Google Cloud, you have to find these patterns and now kind of identify who are the right companies to target based on that.
Absolutely. Yep.
Cool.
That will not change, I don't
That
think.
will
You
not
gotta
change.
always look for patterns,
The,
leverage data, leverage what your customers are telling you.
Cool.
Yeah.
I think we're almost up to an end. I think two kind of just like small fire questions at the end.
Sure.
What does a business case mean to you?
Everything. I mean, for me, a business case is the rationale to make a decision, right? It helps to understand I back into when you make decisions, you want to be able to say to somebody, here's my logic
Mm,
on this decision,
mhm,
right? And so for me, a business case helps to explain, here's my logic
mm.
in the simplest terms.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very quick. I love the answer. What's next for Laura? Like, what should we look out for?
Oh, well, I'm figuring that out right now. I'm excited. I mean, there is so much going on, and I am looking at the landscape and peeling back layers of the onion and figuring out where what I do can add the most value.
Mm,
And yeah, hopefully I'll be on some sort of rocket ship ride.
cool. I mean, if people kind of want to get in touch, like, what's a good way then if they want to?
Yeah, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm on
Okay.
there all the time. And yeah, absolutely. I'd love that.
Amazing. Hey, thanks for joining. Of course, this was a whole like guinea pig session being in the room for the first time, but love the content, love the whole stories that you have. I think from all the different journeys, you always have a story to tell, which makes it so tangible and kind of appropriate to think about and just easier to digest. So
Thank you.
thanks for
It was fun,
joining.
Max. Thanks. Appreciate it.